Okay, guys, good morning. Today, we're going to talk about requirements, and hopefully you remember one of your first exercises doing use case diagrams and user stories. So before we start, this week, exercise 3, you have homework. After completing the lecture, your activities are going to open and the link to submit the new exercise. You have, as usual, 1 week. The new exercise is about more UML diagrams, in particular, this one, class diagrams. Class diagrams, when you have a source code, classes, you can represent those classes in a diagram. You are going to notice, you are going to learn, your classes are going to be boxes. Representing classes is easy. The real challenge, and something that I want you to put particular attention, is how do you connect the classes, the connectors between these boxes and what they mean in the source code. If I have 2 classes and I connect them like this, or with a diamond thing, or use with an arrow, those 3 are the main connectors that you're going to learn about it, and we're going to review them in 2 weeks. So UML diagrams, class diagrams, only 1 diagram for this week, the class diagram. You're going to watch some videos and you have an exercise. Well, you have 2 exercises. 1 exercise is to create a diagram from some description on paper. The other is to create a diagram from a source code. So a couple of diagrams that you need to submit. Next, some of you asked me about the dates for the exams. So I just want to share with you, the idea is for the first midterm to be in the week 7. The week 7, depending on your section, for you, I think it's September 29. So the plan is to have our first midterm in 2 weeks, more or less. And for the second midterm, right now is scheduled in the week 12. So that means for you, November 3rd. So these are the dates, tentative dates for our first and second midterm. And the final, according with the ASU calendar, you can check online the schedule, sorry, the schedule that the university have for the finals. Good, any question? Yeah, a lot of the things in the midterm are going to be concepts, theory, and UML diagrams. A lot of the diagrams, starting from use cases, the next week you are still going to work with another diagrams. So yeah, the midterm include a lot of diagrams in UML. I am going to do a review, the week before the exam. So next week, I am going to use some time to give you like a quick review and maybe examples of the kind of questions that you're going to have. So right now, my goal, sharing with you the dates, particularly this one, you have 2 weeks, review everything. If you are okay with the lectures, if everything that we review in the lectures is fine, and you have complete the exercises without a problem, you're going to be fine for the exam. Both. We have questions that are theoretical, a lot of theoretical questions for the first midterm, because basically we're reviewing theory until today, but also questions that are similar to the exercises that you are doing right now. For instance, for class diagrams today, the exercise this week, you have 2 classes, some source code, and you need to translate to the diagram. Before, you have this description of a system and you need to create the use case diagram. Those are going to be kind of questions in your exam also. For the people that is enrolled with the DRC, I already have the information. You'd be sure that the DRC sent me the information. and you automatically are going to be to have the accommodations for the exam. So you be sure that they send the contract. Something that we need to review, and we're going to talk about this probably next week, is the complexity of the diagram usually is not related with the quality, but well, we need to talk about it. So for the exam, no, remember, we talked about this in the first video. The exam is closed book. The idea is you cannot use anything during the exam. The exam is kind of the quiz that you did, but closed book, nothing during the exam. So you have 2 weeks to start preparing yourselves. I am going to talk about that next week. Yeah, you're going to be using, I'm not sure if Lockdown Browser, Respondus exactly, or RPNow, but one of those two, you're going to be using one. Yeah. The class before, we have a lecture as usual, but I am going to use some time for the review. Yeah. Again, review the slides, best ways to study, review the slides, be sure that everything is clear. There are always questions in the videos, questions that I asked you to do in the lectures. There are test yourself sections in the slides. Review those. If you are comfortable with that, almost ready to go. The exercises that you are doing, the diagrams, if you are comfortable doing the diagrams, completing diagrams, if you understand what does it mean, an oval, a line, an arrow with a triangle head, etc. Those are the things that you need to know for the first midterm. Yeah, the exam is during the lecture class. So in 2 weeks, you're going to have homeworks, but during the lecture time, it's going to be for the exam. We do not have lecture that week. Yeah, usually we're going to post several announcements like the exam is tomorrow, the exam is today, please complete your exam, things like that. But please put in your calendar, that is the date for your first exam. And remember, the exams are a high percentage of your final grade. During the class, I mean, the exam is going to open at 9 and it's going to close 10:15. During the date that is your lecture, like today. So you cannot take the exam like in the midnight or afternoon or another day. It should be the day of the lecture. It should be during the time of the lecture. But yes, the exam is online. So in the same place that you are right now, you can be taking your exam there. You do not need to go to a classroom because, as we mentioned before, there is no classroom that can have us, all of us, doing the exam with safety. Yeah, I need to confirm with you if it's going to be Lockdown Browser or something else, but similar. That is correct. During the exam, you cannot use Zoom. I mean, we are not going to be having a lecture. You are going to be doing your exam. That's it. And you are not able to open any other software. You're not going to draw the diagrams. It's an online exam. You do not have access to tools. So basically, most of the exam is I show you versions of the exam, versions of the diagram, and I ask you to select which diagram is the correct one. Or you have a diagram and tell me which is the source code that corresponds to that diagram, things like that. It's more like multiple choice questions. And the open ones are more theoretical than drawing things. You need a webcam, remember. Any option that we take for the exam, you need a webcam because basically the software that we use for proctoring the exam is going to be recording your face, like mine right now, and your desktop in the computer. A lot of the questions are going to be multiple choice, yes, but there are going to be questions that are open, what is a requirement, for instance, and it use what is a requirement with an open box. It's just an example. Now, the exam is a pool of questions. So there are a lot of questions there. For some of you, could be 100% multiple choice. For others, 1 or 2 open. For others, a little bit more. I mean, I am just kind of giving extreme examples, but it's not the same exam for everyone. Kind of, if you remember the quiz one, kind of, but quiz one do not have open questions. Here we're going to have open questions. Quiz one didn't use Respondus or Lockdown Browser or RP Now. So quiz one was open book, and you just answer the quiz and you can open anything. If you haven't worked with RP Now or with Respondus, the idea is that this software basically run Canvas in full screen in your computer and do not allow you to open other software, and also is recording you. So that is kind of the proctoring thing that you have in a classroom, like the instructor watching you answer your exam, but in this case with a software in the computer. Yep. Okay, so again, I am going to show you examples of the questions, but that could be next week. For today, requirements, moving forward. No, remember, the exam is closed book. You cannot use anything, anything. No books, no notes, no calculators, no cell phone, nothing. Good? Okay, so you have 2 weeks to start reviewing things and making sure that everything is clear. Again, review the slides, review your exercises, and you have these 2 weeks to contact me or contact the TA and clarify any question that you could have. Well, you need to memorize some things. Yes, I mean, there is always good to have in the memory some ideas. I am not going to evaluate with the semicolon that you know the exact definition for something, but you need to show me that you understand things. For instance, today we're going to talk about requirements and necessities, and I am going to ask you that in the exam. I need to know that you remember the difference between a requirement and a necessity, but we're going to talk about it. And similar, I need you to remember the difference between waterfall and B-model, for instance, or the difference between waterfall and agile, being more extreme. So a little bit of memorization, but I think it's more about comprehension. Like, I understand the differences and I remember the differences. Or I can mention, if I have a large project, can I use agile or is better waterfall? Or if I have a mission critical project, it is better to use B-model or spiral. Those are kind of the questions that you're going to have. Yeah, the same. You can have in the exam a diagram, and I am going to ask you to translate that diagram to source code. And source code is something that you can write like text, but understanding the diagram is the first thing that you need in order to create the source code. No practice exam. I am going to do a review. Yes, I am going to show you some questions. Yes, there is going to be a link like practice exam, but it's going to be empty. The only goal for that link is for you to test your computers and be sure that you can run the Lockdown Browser or the Respondus. That is going to be the goal for the practice link. But other than that, the review session that I am going to do during the lecture, and questions like the one that I am right now mentioning, is like, that is the kind of exam that we're going to have. The exam is going to cover all the lectures previous to the exam. So in this case, if the exam is in 2 weeks, everything, including this week and the next one, all of that can be in the exam. You are going to write code, and that is something that you are going to review this week. Class diagrams in particular, they are equivalent to source code. And going back and forward from the diagram to the code or from the code to the diagram is something that you should be able to do during the exam. So if I give you source code, you do not need to draw the diagram. You're going to have multiple choice options, multiple pictures, and you need to select one. Or the opposite, you have the diagram, and if I ask you for the source code, well, the source code is something that you can type in a box. Good. So your exercises and the lectures, review the videos. If you have missed something, one of the lectures, you can check the videos. All of the videos are posted. Check the videos, your exercises. Be sure that you can answer that kind of questions, like the ones in your exercises, without help, without reviewing the book, without searching on the internet. If you can do that, you are prepared for the exam. The programming language, Java. Everything that we're going to do around is assuming that you know Java. So be prepared to write some classes in Java and methods and things like that. Good? Okay, moving forward. Previously, we review process models, and we review all, well, not all, but several process models that are plan-based. Lecture 1. Lecture 2, we review the agile process, all the details and the meetings and the weeks and what happened. But also we talk about how the thing starts. It doesn't matter which process model you follow, but according with what we review, these colors that I use to show you the activities, well, things start with requirements. And in particular, the first activity, engineering of requirements. And this is important. When you are a programmer, when you are taking CSI 110, the instructor, someone, give you a lab, and the lab is this list of things that you need to program. It's like create a main, and inside of the main put an if, and inside of the if do this, do that. That kind of lab instructions, that kind of specific requirements is something that you give to a programmer, because the only work of the programmer is to transform that to code. However, if you're going to do software in the real life, the customer is not going to give you requirements. The customer is going to give you ideas. The customer is going to give you what he or she needs. But the first thing that you need to do as an engineer is requirement engineering, which means understand what the customer wants, which means you are the ones creating, documenting the requirements. Now, there are two ways to document requirements. Number one, the diagrams, the visual representation. Number two, natural language. Well, natural language is too open. So we can use natural language, but following a template. And that is what you did with user stories. These two are the two main ways to represent requirements. This one, the stories are connected with following an agile approach. I showed you in the previous lecture this board with all the requirements like these boxes. And the goal is that each of the members of the team take one of these requirements, go and work for 2 weeks, and then in 2 weeks, the requirement is done. The requirement is complete. And doing that in several sprints, you complete the project. Now, the diagrams. Usually, UML diagrams are connected with this more long-term project and with this idea of documenting things, documenting everything. Usually these diagrams, the use cases, are connected with a small document that explains the diagram. And usually these ovals are connected with the other diagrams that you reviewed this week, activity and state. And all of that in UML correspond to the documentation of the requirements for a particular project with a high level of detail. But usually you use that for the plan-based project. So it doesn't matter which one you use. It doesn't matter which process you follow. but you need to understand requirements, and the requirements are going to be, number one, in the diagrams, hopefully we agree, each of these ovals is one requirement. And in the user stories, well, each of these things has something, I want something, because something. Each of these lines, each of these statements is one requirement. So in the diagram, each oval, in the user stories, each story. But this is too fast. Step number one, talking about requirements. What is a requirement? Why is it important to do this requirement engineering? Well, number one, it's important because usually people understand different things with the same idea. There are a lot of words in our language. There are a lot of things that for some people represent one thing and for other people represent a different thing. Communication is an issue. Two people talking and each of them can think that they understand, but it's not the case. So that is the reason because we put in paper statements or diagrams what we understood. Therefore, in the future, we can go back and check the document. And this applies in the same way for the plan-based, is the contract, or for the agile, the stories, whatever, communication issues. Now, the first issue with communication is these two words. And I will ask again, what is a requirement? But usually the answer is, the requirement is what the customer needs. Now, what the customer needs is the necessity of the customer. These two things are not the same. Can you help me to describe which is the difference between one and the other? Any idea? I need okay. First difference, and I agree with you, the necessities are defined by the customer, the client. The requirements is something defined by the engineers. Yeah, that is correct. Well, they are going to be equally important. What I need should be your requirements, but something is going to be different. Let me tell you this. I want you to do a project at the end of the semester, and I want you to do the most beautiful piece of software that you can do. The most beautiful piece of software that you can do. Is a necessity or a requirement? Well, necessity, yes. Let me tell you this. The difference between these two are these ideas. I can ask you, I need the most beautiful piece of software that you can create. Can you measure that? Can we, in some point, agree that whatever you complete is satisfying what I ask for? There is some way to verify or measure that what I ask for is the same thing that you are delivering, that the software that you create had what I asked for. And when I ask you for the most beautiful piece of software, there is no way that you can verify or measure that whatever you give to me is the most beautiful piece of software. Why? because what I am asking is, that is what a necessity is my subjective ideas, something that I understand, something that I have the knowledge about how to measure, or something that I have a particular definition, but could not be the same for everyone involved. The most beautiful piece of software, well, the first thing is, what doesn't mean beautiful for me? And the idea that whatever is that for me could not be the same for the developer that is going to develop the software, or for everyone else involved in the project. When you have something like this, things that are not clear, things that are ambiguous, things that are subjective, the first thing that happens when you are students is something like this. You listen the concept, you listen the idea, and then it's like, okay, this is what I understand, so you should be thinking the same, bye. What happened when the two concepts for two people, you and your professor, you and your customer, you and your manager, is not the same? First problem, do not assume things. You need to clarify things. So the most beautiful piece of software that you can create, immediately the engineer is the one that asks, oh, what does it mean beautiful for you? How do you measure that? What is going to be the test case that is going to put a check mark on that? When you listen the necessities from the customer and you are able to translate those necessities to things that are able to be measured, verified. Moreover, when it's something that you can put a priority, talking about this necessity, this requirement, and the priority of doing that for complete a full system. When it's something that is atomic, small, something that you can complete in 2 weeks in the case of Agile, when it's something that you and all your teammates understand in the same way, is clear. Moreover, is not contradictory with other things that you are going to do. When you have this checklist in a statement, that statement is a requirement. And that is something that you create from whatever ideas, necessities, or subjective request the customer give you. Moving from something subjective to something that can be measured is the first step. And that's something that can be measured, verified, atomic, unambiguous, clear, consistent, with a priority. All this is what a requirement is. Measure. Can you tell me, if I ask you for the most beautiful piece of software in the world, you know what? Right now, it's December the 4th. I didn't complete that requirement, but this thing is 50% beautiful. If you can tell me, like, it's not completely done, you are working in iterations, but you can measure how complete it is, that is the idea of being able to measure something. Now, my idea, I can ask you for the most beautiful piece of software in the world. That is a necessity. Translate that to a requirement is, you need to talk with me and say, like, okay, what do you consider beautiful? And maybe I told you, you know what? The most beautiful thing is a piece of software that have the background green and all the fonts in yellow. Just imagine the piece of software, everything green and every text is yellow. That is wonderful. What you do is to translate the most beautiful piece of software in the world to something like all backgrounds in green and all the fonts in yellow. All the backgrounds in green, you can verify that. You can measure that. How many backgrounds do we have in the application and how many of them are green? And all the font in yellow, again, you can verify that. A tester can run the program and check, okay, yellow, 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 yellow. Oh, this is green, black, whatever, change that to yellow. Two things that can be measured or verified, a necessity for the customer. You do not need to evaluate if this green and yellow is beautiful. It's not your work to judge the customer or whatever the customer want or think. It's just, I cannot measure this, but I can measure this. And with this, I can prove that I complete the system as you ask. With this, I cannot. So you work with requirements, with things that you can measure, evaluate, and you need to start with the necessities of the customer, with these subjective ideas that a customer could have. Makes sense? So at this point, you create some user stories. A user story, this as I want to, is one requirement. You create use case diagrams. Each oval was one requirement. If you read what you have inside of the oval, or you read your user story, they should have all these characteristics. They should be atomic, unambiguous, consistent. They can be able to be verified or measured if they are complete. And well, this is something that we're going to do later. We can put a priority, is important or not. And we can follow up on that requirement. I mean, what is going to happen with this oval in the source code? Where this oval, this requirement is in the source code. I mean, which is the class or which is the method that is accomplishing this requirement. But that is something that is going to happen later. For now, the most important thing, if I ask you, hey, this is a requirement, yes or no, what you need to do during your exam, for instance, is checklist. Atomic, unambiguous, consistent, and this is maybe the most important. This thing, whatever it is, can be measured, yes or no. If no, it's a necessity. If yes, with the three previous, that is a requirement. And that is what you are supposed to have in your user stories and also in your diagrams in each oval. Okay, now requirements. There are two kinds of requirements for a piece of software. Two. You have functional requirements and you have non-functional requirements. Yeah. Functional requirements. These are the ones that you put in a use case diagram. All your ovals are functional requirements. What is a functional requirement? Something that the software do. I am going to give you a more detailed definition in the next slide, but the simple idea is anything that the software do is a functional requirement. Ask for a login and password, give money to the user, print something, show something, open something, save something. Whatever you put in the ovals in your use case diagrams was a requirement, and in particular in the use case diagrams, all of them, the ovals, are functional requirements, things that the software do. The only thing that you put in a use case diagram is the functional requirements, the things that the software are going to do. That's it. That is the goal of the diagram, the functional requirements. However, for the Agile, for the user stories, in the user stories, you can document requirement in general, functional, but also non-functional. Which are the non-functional? Again, I am going to give you the full definition, just as an introduction. The non-functional, anything that is related with quality or constraints. It's nothing about what the software do. Any requirement, any request from the user that is not something that the software do is a non-functional requirement. For instance, Yeah, very good question. I have a question here, like, what if the customer asks for a piece of software that run in a particular speed? That is a requirement, yes or no? It's like, you know what, guys? You're going to do this piece of software as your final project, but this is going to do A, B, C, D, open a file, process the data, save the file, whatever, but it should finish all the process in 1 second. Is a requirement, yes or no? The first thing that you're thinking here is like, okay, it is clear. All of us understand this. Can be measured that your program do this, do that in less than 1 second or maximum 1 second? Is something that you can measure? Is something that is clear? No? Yes, okay, yes. Good. It's a requirement. If I ask you, the software should finish in less than 1 second, you can measure that. It's a requirement. Now, is a functional requirement or is a non-functional requirement? Is a non-functional requirement because we're talking about speed. Speed is quality, right? Let me tell you this. When you think about functional requirements is something that one programmer is going to put in one particular method or one particular class. Functional requirements is something that one of the team members is going to program. One. So I can do the trace of the requirement to one person, the person that implement that requirement, that functionality in the software. The functionality, authentication of the user. One programmer is going to be doing the part of the software that do the authentication, the part of the software that show the screen with login and password, the part of the software that read that data and search in a database and tell the user if the user is authorized or not. One programmer. Those are the functional requirements. The non-functional requirements are things that do not depend of one person, but depend of the full team. For instance, if I am asking that the project finish, the process of the information finish fast, 1 second, that is something that do not depend of this guy and this one thing that he's going to do, like maybe read the file, but it's something that all the team need to be aware because speed is something that impact the programming of all of them. Not in one particular piece of code, not in one particular line, but in the way that they are going to visualize the solution. This should be fast. Okay, we need to search for the best data structure that allow us to process the data quickly. Okay, we cannot use linear search. Maybe we need something else. We cannot use an array. Maybe we can use a hash table because the priority is speed. One requirement that we have, non-functional, all of us need to know is this idea of speed. So it's a requirement, is a non-functional requirement because it's not a functionality in the system. It's something about the quality of all the functionalities or one functionality, but it's quality. Now, again, if you think about use case diagrams, in the use case diagrams, the only thing that you represent in the ovals is the functional requirements. Diagrams, only functional. If you think about user stories, in the user stories, you can talk about whatever you want. Okay, the software output, tell me more about it. It's like, what about the output of the software? The output of the software is functional or not functional? The output, what? Like the program needs to calculate something and show that something as a result. That is something that the software is doing. That could be functional because it's, again, a service, a behavior, something that the software is doing. If we want to talk about the output should be able to be read by some particular group of people. Like, you know what? All the output should be at least in a font 20 because the user of this software could have some particular visual disabilities. That is not functional because you are telling me about the quality or the constraints, but the processing the output is a functionality. Again, anything that is something that the software should do, and therefore anything that is going to be done by one developer, that means it's going to be in one class or it's going to be in one particular method. If I show you a requirement and I ask you where in your source code is this, and you can point one method or a set of lines, one, only one, that was a functional requirement because it's something that the software do, and you can tell me in which place of the system, the software, that thing is happening. But if we talk about quality, your software should be fast. Can you point out in the software where is that fast happening? Well, it's fast because this and this and this hash table here, this algorithm here, this line there. When that happens, when the thing is in more than one place, when it's impacting kind of the full project, probably that is a non-functional because it's not something that is happening. It's not one place in the software. It's something like speed, is something like quality in the display, is something that is more at the project level. And all the team is aware of that. The work of the team is impacted by that. But if the project is going to be fast, it's not because this guy or this guy alone, it should be a team effort. And the functional ones, the functional is one people. The graphical user interface, anything related with the graphical user interface, if you are talking about, for instance, asking for the user authentication. Well, asking for the user authentication, one thing that you need to do is to show this dialog box with login and the box, password and the box. That is functional because it's something that the software is doing. Now, again, if I tell you, I want this beautiful window that asks you for the login and password, and at the top, Sparky is dancing. Sparky dancing, functional. Authentication, functional. Beautiful. What do you mean by beautiful? Background in maroon, fonts in gold. Okay, functional too. Things that the software is going to do, showing a background, showing the fonts, showing the text areas, showing the Sparky dancing, all of that, functional. I am going to show you examples of quality things. The easy one, performance, speed. But anything that the software do, anything that is something that one programmer is going to do, showing a text area, showing a label, showing a window, capturing the info from the user, checking a database, processing something, printing something on the screen. The printing something is functional because it's a function that the software is doing, printing whatever. When we move to quality and constraints, let me show you examples, then those are not functional. Again, for your exam, in a use case diagram, if I give you a diagram with 100 of these ovals, all of them are functional. You do not need to read them. If they are in a diagram, if they are ovals, all the ovals are functional. The non-functional in the plan-based paradigm, they are going to be in a separate document, not in the diagram. In the Agile, everything is going to be user stories, functional or non-functional. Good. Now, for you to memorize for the exam, functional requirement, anything that describe reaction, behaviors, or services that the system provide, with this idea that you can test, measure, validate. The word that you use is fine, but you are able to test, validate, or measure whatever is this. Is unambiguous, is clear, and is atomic. If you can remember those three, anything that make you think that this thing is a service, a behavior, a service that the system is going to provide, including printing something on the screen, reading something from the console, 2 + 2, anything that the software is going to do, anything that is going to go to the CPU is a requirement and is functional. They should have these characteristics. If not, it's just a necessity. Now, examples. Question for your exam. First one, is a necessity or is a requirement? B, is a necessity or is a requirement? C, is a necessity or is a requirement? Any of them is ambiguous. Any of them is unclear. Yeah, well, here it could be very, very hard to evaluate the context because basically I am giving you one requirement for 3 different systems. So that is kind of, you cannot know about it. Here, my question is more about, well, clear, yes or no? Clear, yes or no? Clear, yes or no? Subjective or objective? And the most important one, can you validate, measure, or test this? Can you validate, measure, or test this? Can you validate, measure, or test this? So clear and measure, validation. You think those 3 are clear? You think those 3 can be easily tested, validated, measured?
Yes.
Yeah, binary yes or no. And I think hopefully you agree with me. Examples of requirements. You're going to have something for search and you're going to search invoices. I think it's pretty clear that you can show the customer here. This is the search part, maybe the search window, and it's working or not. And I think searching is something that is pretty clear. Usually, guys, for the requirements, all of them have 1 or 2 words that are the key idea. And if that key idea is clear for everyone, you can be comfortable with your requirement. Searching, I think there is no subjective thing here. Sending something by email, user's email. Obviously, there should be another requirement in which I can understand what is a report, right? There should be requirements about the content of the report. But here, my requirement is, okay, you want me to send by email something? Think as a developer. The developer that is going to take this line is like, okay, I am going to do a class or a method, and that class or method is able to send emails. What I am going to send by email? The content of an object report. And who is going to program the class report? I don't care. But I am going to send by email the content of an object report, and probably I am going to receive that object as a parameter. Done. I can prove that I did that. And for the customer, you can create a report and you can show if the email is working, yes or no. So you can test, you can validate. And this one, Well, something like Canvas, right? I can create an assignment and make the assignment a team assignment, and therefore I can use Canvas and create groups, whatever. Is something that you can show me if it's working or not, a requirement. Now, for your exam, what if all of you know the Pac-Man video game or Mario Bros or whatever? I can choose any video game that you know. Can you tell me the requirements for the Pac-Man video game? Moreover, can you create a use case diagram that show the requirements of the Pac-Man video game? Yes, you can. How many actors in the Pac-Man video game? Talking about a use case diagram. No, I'm not, but I use the Pac-Man as an example in several classes. 2 actors, okay. Which are those actors? Which is the name for the actors? Could you agree that one actor is the player and is the primary actor? Now we're talking about primary and secondary. Which is the other actor? The other actor is the game itself. And if you go inside of the game, like you want to get involved with the names, the other actor is the ghost, right? These guys that are moving alone there, they are an actor. Or you can call just the system, the game itself. Something is happening without the player controlling it. Now, I am sure that you can imagine requirements here. What are some things that the player do? What are things that the system do? The player move the character. The player hunting the enemy, whatever it is. These guys also are going to have a moving requirement because they are moving along. And they are functional requirements because if you think about programming the game, someone need to program this part in which the player, the user, can move the yellow circle. And someone needs to program this part in which something on the screen is moving along the enemy requirements. Can you think about the requirements to create Canvas? And you can think about these quizzes, submit homework, review my grades, several different scenarios that maybe I can use in the exam to tell you, you know what, have you used Canvas for review your grades? Which are the requirements? What do we have there? My ASU, like enrolling in a class. What do you do when you enroll in a class or to drop a class? Can you think about the requirements? How that software was done? Or any mobile application, Facebook if you want. Which are the requirements there? Which are the functionalities that the software do? Think about it. Try to solve any of these. And we can talk in office hours if you have any question. I want to talk about the relationships. Yes, I want to talk about include and extend. So I am going to move to that. So far here, the only thing that I am talking about is the actor, the ovals. And well, you know, you connect the actor with the ovals, and like the player and the Pac-Man, you connect the player with moving and you connect the ghost with a moving that is different because one is moving with the keyboard and the other is moving automatically by some kind of crazy algorithm, right? So 2 different requirements, 2 different ovals, 2 different things to develop. Something that we need to put here is the relationships, include and extend. By the way, in another class, I can share you the use case diagram for the Pac-Man. That is something that you are going to do maybe in another class. Good. So these are examples. Now, the non-functional, to review examples also. Non-functional requirements. I mentioned constraints and I mentioned quality. When we talk about quality, I am sure that you immediately think about performance. Performance, usually timing, but quality is also about, you know what, the failure of the system, how long the system can be down per year. Usability, again, this idea of how friendly is the system for the user. Quality attributes. This is a full picture that shows you like everything that could be a non-functional requirement. For instance, talking about constraints. What if I ask you, your final project is going to be using the Java programming language? Is that a requirement? Use Java for your project. I am asking for that and I am your customer. Hopefully, yes, it's a requirement. Now, is a functional requirement or a non-functional requirement? Is a functionality, behavior, service that the system is going to have, or is a constraint quality? Non-functional. Non-functional, and in particular, there is this category here about anything related with developing instructions. I want you to use Java. I want you to use this particular database. I want you to use this particular platform. I want you to work for Android or for iOS. All of that is developing requirements. They are non-functional, and all of them are examples of constraints, limitations. Things that all the team need to know. They are requirements, even though they are not functionalities in the system. Like if I ask you to use the Java programming language, it's a constraint. You should use Java, even if you do not want to use Java or you do not like Java, but the customer wants Java. Java is not a functionality that the system is going to have, but all the source code, all the functionality is going to be a Java program. Constraints. Obviously, all the things related with quality, usability, performance, space. I want an application for my phone, but you know what? Something that we want is a small application. It should be 5 kilobytes because we want this in blah, blah, blah. Do not crash. Should use another system that we have in the company, should connect with, and you can name it, it should connect it. This should connect with my ASU system, so you can interact with my ASU and download to Facebook your grades. I don't know. Whatever thing that the user asks you that is not a functionality, but something related with limitations of quality is a non-functional requirement. And again, you do not put this in the diagram, in the use case diagram for functionality, but you put this in user stories if you want. Speed, related with the CPU, related with how many times the user is going to wait for a result, related with, in a video game, the refresh time that you want to use or that you should use, size, megabytes, or well, hardware embedded system. The measure can be circuits, whatever. Easy to use, training time. How many help messages do I need to read in order to accomplish something? Reliability, robustness, portability, anything should be able to be measured. If we talk about the software should be fast, the software should be fast is a necessity. The requirement is as you mentioned before, the software should finish in 1 second. Fast, necessity, is unclear. What does it mean fast for you? Okay, should finish in 1 second. 1 second is something that I can measure. Fast is a subjective idea. Fast is 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 year. It's not clear. 1 second is clear. Well, one question is like, the program do not crash. And do not crash because out of bound exceptions. That is not a requirement, guys. If the program crashed because out of bound exception is an error in the program. So we do not expect the customer to ask you, please be a good programmer. Learn how to use arrays and pointers. That is not a requirement. However, if we talk about do not crash, that could be a requirement because why? You know what? We have the system. Facebook is a full system. And the requirement for Facebook is I cannot ask for do not crash, but I can ask you, you know what? In a period of 1 year, the system should be running and working correctly all the time. Maybe you can, I am okay if your system crash for 1 hour every year. So you measure how many times Facebook crash in a year. And if adding all the time in 1 year, that addition is less than 60 minutes, that is a measure of do not crash. Again, in a big scenario. Because it's not about the software do not crash. It's not about the software testing and blah, blah, blah. This is about, okay, the system is running, and what is the support that I have in the hardware? What is the support that I have in order to deal with attacks? What is the support that I have to deal with a lot of users suddenly connecting because something particularly happened and I need to separate nodes? Do not crash in that scenario is something that could be a requirement, is something related with quality, is something that you can measure. Do not crash in terms of errors in the code, that is not a requirement. That, again, you are assuming that you have good programmers. Good. In the same way, if you talk about quality of the code, usually that is something that you as a developers are going to apply. It's something that you're going to learn. Clean architecture, clean coding, and so on, but those are not requirements that come from the user. The user can ask for easy to use. The user can ask for speed. The user can ask for reliability in terms of the full system. But quality in your code, related with the number of lines or related with the cyclomatic complexity or related with other metrics that we have as a developers, as an engineers about the code, those are things that you should do, but they are not requirements from the customer. What we're talking here about requirements engineering is requirements that come from the customer. Functional or non-functional. There are much more, but they do not come from the customer, like clean coding. The customer usually is not going to care about if your code is clean or not. They want a software that is working, and probably most of them never are going to review the source code. So that can be out. 2 examples. Requirements. Yes or no. Functional, non-functional. I have another version of the software. I have several apps running. You know what? The new version of the software should be compatible with previous ones. So this is good for the operating systems. Any app that is running currently in this version should be able to continue running when we release the new version. Is a requirement? I think so, right? It's clear. We can understand that. We can measure that. In this case, measure is yes or no. I think so. Is functional or non-functional? Well, it's functional because all the apps should continue working. So because the apps are going to be working, this is about functionality? No. It's not a function that the system is going to do. It's not an activity in the system. It's more like a constraint or a quality. It's not something that one developer is going to do. It's not about one method or one class that, okay, this method, this class is going to provide this service. It's something that involves the full project. It's something about quality, constraints. B, non-functional. Non-functional requirement. Backward compatibility. Be sure that everything that worked before is going to continue working. For Canvas, for a university software, standards. Okay, this software is going to be handling student information. The student information should be always keep secure, private, and so on. There are a lot of things described here. Think about a standard to handle your information. And I am going to give this to my team of developers. And hey guys, I don't know what are you going to do, but just be sure that anything is okay with these things, with these rules. It's a requirement. It is clear, can be measured. I think so. They can open the FAIR regulation and they can review things there. And I think they are going to be very, very clear. Moreover, we can check each of the things that is done or not. It's a requirement. Functional or non-functional? Involve the full project, involve the security of the information. Security of the information, I think that is related with quality. Okay, quality is non-functional. Non-functional requirements. Exactly. Quality, constraints, properties. That is another word that you are going to read in the textbook. Any property, properties, qualities, constraints. All these diagrams that I show you, those are non-functional requirements because they are things that the system do not do, but they are properties that the system, the software is going to have. Yes. Obviously, for your exam, I have the same questions. Can you think about one example of a non-functional requirement in the Pac-Man video game? Or a non-functional requirement in Canvas? Or one non-functional requirement for my ASU? And hopefully yes, because you are going to have this open box and you are going to put there your answer. And remember, number one, whatever you put there, the question is, that is a requirement? And if yes, that is non-functional or maybe functional. Non-functional requirement for these systems. And I think you can figure out something. Yes? Well, hopefully. Now, moving forward, this functional or non-functionals, 1, 2, 3, and 4, quickly. can you agree with me? All of them are functional. And the reason, because I am moving forward, I am almost out of time, but capture, merge, dialog box show up, click, pop up, all of those are things that I am asking the system to do, functionalities for the system to have. You can read the full statement, but everything there is a complement to the action that I am underlying, right? So, these ones. Well, if in the previous slide, all of them were functional, you can safely guess that all of these are non-functional, right? The only tricky one, and this could be in your exam, all of them non-functional. Double check the 5 is not functional, but some people get confused about the mouse, If you read careful the 5, it's not asking for any particular functionality, service, behavior, or action to be programmed. It's just asking for the software to have a graphical user interface, to work in a graphical way. It's not going to be a console application. That is what it's describing. So non-functional, all of them. This one. All of them non-functional. Again, I do not have a lot of time to interact with you guys, but this one is about the format that we need to use to print something. It's like before I am telling you background in green and fonts in yellow, 2 decimals for printing, easy to use, be careful. If I only tell you easy to use, that is a necessity. However, here in particular, it's like I am asking for a particular people, age, and I am asking for a particular situation. Can you measure this? Can this age be measured? Because that is one of the things for the requirement, right? Can we measure this? And hopefully you tell me yes. What can you do for measuring? Put the software in a computer, ask 100 people to use the system and see if for that people in that age range is easy to use or not. Focus group. It's a way to measure, right? Anyway, all of them non-functionals, and they are on the slide. You can read and review carefully. And I am going to stop here. Yeah, use some time. Any question to finish? No? Good. See you next week, guys. Please do not forget exercise 3, class diagrams. Thank you.